Welcome to Shore Sports MD. We're with Dan Harding. Yes, he's the athletic director of Kent Island High School, but he's also the head athletic director for the entire Bayside Conference. So we wanted to talk with you today, kind of a wrap-up, so to speak, of the fall sports season for the Bayside. So thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
So let's start off with football. There's a couple of things pressing that we've talked about on our podcast and we've talked about in our broadcast, and has to do with Washington High School. They forfeited 3 games this year. Some were last minute, including a playoff game. It doesn't give a good look for the Bayside. It doesn't give a good look for Washington High School, and it certainly is a disadvantage for like Colonel Richardson for the playoff game, where they find out, well, we only had 4 people get on the bus. What, if anything, can the Bayside do to make sure that doesn't happen in the future?
So I think as we have, you just continue to have the conversations. Obviously, we want every school to have a successful program or a program, but it is certainly something that we've discussed. I wouldn't want to be in Washington's position, so this isn't anything damning on our part by any means. It's just tough. That coach over there wants as many boys to come out and play, but I think we just have to keep having the conversation. And if it doesn't look like they're going to be able to field a team, and look, things are going to happen if you can't play your full schedule. Okay, but if we know that early on, it's only fair to those teams to give them as much notice as possible, and maybe not have a football program. But you never want to see a football program die. So it's a tough balance.
What about the talk of possibly having them play a JV season to help get their numbers built up and maybe get a little bit of success as well?
So that's been a conversation, not just with them, but I mean, not many other sports, but other sports within the conference. The bylaws don't really support that move. It should be you do a varsity only. However, I don't think it's completely off the table necessarily. It's something we would look at because, again, Washington, we want to have a football program. Those boys and athletes should be able to play football down there. But to your points earlier, it's too detrimental to have so many games not played. That's not going to work going forward either.
All right, let me climb off the Washington bus now, and let's climb on to something else. I think overall, in my opinion, when you look at the Bayside football competition this year, I felt like it was pretty even, except for the 1A teams playing against some of the 2A teams that weren't so competitive. Colonel Richardson against Kent Island. Colonel Richardson had a great year. They struggled against Seaford. They struggled against Kent Island. But when they played light competition, they rose to the occasion. I know the schedule has changed a little bit this year. Decatur's not going to be playing Snow Hill. Kent County's not going to be playing Parkside to end the year. But we still have in week 3 Colonel Richardson playing Kent Island. That it's not beneficial to Kent Island or to Colonel Richardson, in my opinion, or is it? Are the coaches asking for this?
So no. I mean, well, yes and no. Certainly, if Colonel plays us week 3 and picks up a win or is a very close game, that's going to be a great feather in there.
It would be newsworthy.
Yep. So, but I do think there is an attempt at balance in that schedule. Clarence Johnson, our executive director, just painstakingly goes over and tries to figure out, hey, this school, we don't want them playing these 2 schools in a row, or all those little pieces. If we could ever get to a balance, it's very difficult. Not very difficult. It is difficult to pick up out-of-conference games. And so, like when Crofton joined Anne Arundel, that made it a little bit harder to pick up some football games out of conference. We used to say here at Kent Island and at Queen Anne's, and even all the way down maybe to Cambridge, hey, we can go pick up a game or 2 out of conference, no problem. That's gotten a little harder since a couple other schools opened up. But those are conversations we have because you don't want to beat down the smaller schools. Whether that go back to the Washington conversation, or I was right behind the bench for the Colonel game. That's not a fun game for anybody. But the boys played hard, and that was within the. We actually had both our bands there to travel because that was one of our games that we were supposed to have at home. But it's a constant conversation, just like the Washington one as well, trying to get a good of a balance for the smaller schools as well as really good competition. I don't feel like it has, but you also don't want it to hurt the 2 or 3A schools who need the points that they may or may not pick up playing a smaller school as well.
Well, and Kent Island got good points because Colonel Richardson went on to have a good year, so it did benefit them. It just didn't benefit Colonel Richardson, but you brought up a great point. Yeah, Colonel was overmanned against or undermanned against Kent Island, but at the same time they never quit and they gave it everything they had. And I think games like that can help you build character and can help the program grow, because it gives you a point of reference. You want to be number one. There you go. You need to play teams like that. So when you look at that and the way those teams are, I can't imagine what Clarence has to go through to put a schedule together. I wouldn't want that job.
No, me either. And he keeps, hinting at, well, maybe this will be the last year. And the whole room's like, no. I mean, the attention to detail. He'll come in and he always says, hey, if somebody has a better idea, let's throw it out there. But I mean, that starts 2 years ahead of the schedule. I mean, that's what the one's already out for going forward. But, it's as good of a schedule as we can put together, and it would be nowhere near as good if Clarence wasn't working on it. I mean, he'll look at it and say, okay, Kent County's going to play, say, Queen Anne's this year. Great. Well, then maybe they don't play Kent Island, at all, or if they do, it's later in the season. So there's 4 or 5 games, in between, things like that. But as a rule, the amount of detail and attention to detail he puts in is unbelievable.
Let's talk about all the other sports that went on in the fall. Sarah Van Hornum, who is she was named today our female cross-country athlete of the year. What a season she had, 5th in the state. Probably disappointed with that finish, but it was the mud that really probably slowed her down.
Yeah, the mud and the course itself. I say that's the biggest home field advantage in probably all of high school sports in Maryland, but it's a great course. They do a great job there. She was happy to be done the race. I had the pleasure of being there. I think she wanted a top 3 finish, if I'm honest. But I mean, she's a heck of a runner and just a better person.
I have a feeling it's not going to be her last Runner of the Year award with indoor track and of course the spring track and field as well. A couple of new things have come out from the state. We'll dive into it in our podcast coming up in later in January. But I want to talk to you about the new camp rules that have come out. There was a lot of talk last year that with Queen Anne's. Was it last year or 2 years ago with Queen Anne's and they're 7-on-7 and what have you. And this rule kind of changes things around now to where, and correct me if I'm wrong, coaches can basically hold a 2-week camp at their own school and have a football camp where you can install your offense, you can install your defense, you just can't wear equipment. Where did this rule come from, and do you think it's a good rule?
So the MPSSAA Board of Controls, which is made up of a pretty large voting body, in support of coaches, they felt, why not have the students in front of the best leaders that we have in each sport? And so the thought was, let's move in that direction. And you're right, the way it's written now, the guidance that's out is 12 days, up to 12 days per sport. And that certainly opens the door. The only limiting factors that I see is that football equipment's not allowed. But 7v7, like I said, you could install your entire offense and defense. You just got to declare it a camp. It's got to be approved by your local, Board of Education or superintendent, and they go from there. Ultimately, I think it's a good rule. I like the rule that says, a coaching staff can work with up to 2 athletes per day. I think we trust our coaches. They should be allowed to improve their program. I do worry, though, that there could be. You mentioned Casey Heath earlier. So you get an athlete, or go back in the day, as Zach Goodrich here at Kent Island High School, 3-season athlete. Is he then going to feel pressure? Would he feel pressure to attend 3 camps on top of whatever else they have going on? I also wonder if the spring coaches see much value in it. Their season just ended; it's not going to come back around. But certainly for the fall coaches, that seems like an extra 12 days of preseason with direct instruction or at practice. So I like it, but I think there needs to be balance. And I know in Queen Anne's County, we're going to go ahead and put some parameters in place. I don't think we're looking to limit what the state's going to allow us to do, but just make some rules that make sense.
I'd be curious to know about that. The former rule was you could take your team to a camp, but the coaches weren't allowed to coach at that camp. But I think we all know when the coaches get to those camps, those coaches care. Yeah, they coach. That's what they do. They coach. And this is an opportunity now, like you said, where you have it at your school. But I'd be curious to know, what kind of parameters are we possibly looking at? And I know nothing's in stone yet because we're still a long ways away, but what kind of parameters are we looking at in Queen Anne's County?
So I would think, and Sid and I have not talked in great detail by any means, but I wouldn't want to see a kid able to attend 3 different camps in a day. I wouldn't want to see a kid do a camp for 12 hours in one day. However, outside of that, I also don't want to limit what we're doing here and create a competitive disadvantage either. So there's got to be a balance. Some thoughts I've had early on in conversations with some coaches: do fall coaches get the first shot at the calendar, and then you give it to winter and then spring? And the problem is, any competitive good coach is going to say, heck yeah, I want 12 extra days with my players. I don't care what sport I coach. So I'm not sure how we balance that out, but I think what I've done and started last week is just bring in some coaches, heavy on the fall, because I kind of want to get a sense of what they want as far as a preseason, and then the other factor, and maybe it's a unique to our area. I don't think so, but I also worry about parents. So they're going to plan vacations appropriately, looking at August 9th as a start date, and then all of a sudden they find out, not a mandatory camp, but there's a 2-week camp leading into that, and
it's highly recommended.
Yeah, right. So I mean, that's one of the things. No, mom or dad, they don't have to be there, but the rest of their team's going to be there. So that's going to be the tough part, is making sure, as long as we're transparent and we get it out in the open, I think we'll be fine. But
what does this rule do for open gyms? Does it do away with them, or can they still host open gyms? For instance, I know as a former basketball coach, we'd have open gyms in the summertime. Are you still allowed to have open gyms, or is this something that, because of the camps, you can't have them anymore?
So we're planning on still running open gyms. Our open gyms are going to be open to, like I said, if it's a girls basketball or boys basketball, it would be open to, the entire school. The camps would be as well. However, I would imagine the difference would be there's just more focus and there's instruction, whereas the only reason a coach would be around during open gym is more safety and making sure equipment's out and, kids are doing whatever they're supposed to be doing. Where if they're in a camp, well, then you're providing what I see taking your basketball point would be drills and skills in the morning, and then if I had enough athletes, I would run a round robin scrimmage in the afternoon, and then maybe make it a 4 to 6 hour day camp, no cost, hopefully. That's what we're looking at. But then, do you pay the coaches? that's tough. So
yes, you pay the coaches. Yes. Here, Carisha Hoffman. Yes, you pay the coaches. So, but I think I agree with you. I think it's a good rule. It's an opportunity, to install your offense and your defense. If you're talking football, to install some, your inbounds and your side outs and things like that for basketball. And I imagine you go through the same thing with soccer, because it's also going to allow you some additional conditioning before you get to the heat acclimatization days that will start on the 9th. Will the state still make you follow those rules with this new camp rule falling in?
It's a good question. There's no indication that they will not. And so I fully anticipate they're still going to be in play.
Makes life interesting, and we're going to be getting Coach Harding, and Athletic Director Dan Harding, Coach Harding. Your wife is Coach Harding. So we're going to get him on the podcast hopefully in January. It'll be our midway point, talking about basketball as well. So I do appreciate you taking the time, being very candid about some of the things that are issues that we want to talk about.
Absolutely, that's kind of that's my MO. If we can be transparent and honest, and again, I will say, and I think COVID played it out the best. I think the Bayside Athletic Conference is the best athletic conference in the state, in that we work together. So we look at all those things. We got 1A schools we want to support, 2A and 3A schools, and so anything I can do to kind of help out, I'm happy to.
Check it out, shoresportsmd.com. Share this interview. The more people that see it, the more people that know what's going on in the conference. And if you have a question, feel free to send me an email, mark@shoresportsmd.com, and we'll get that answer for you. Thanks for listening.